What is all this happening? Our beautiful Goa, straddled by the Western Ghats and the Arabian Sea, will soon be a transport hub for coking coal. Many of our Goan brothers and sisters, including Dr. Reverend Father Bolmax Pereira and Rocky Wills, a renowned Goan photographer and artist, are voicing their views against this problem. Not just them, but Indian YouTube stars like Abhi and New, Dhruv Rathi, as well as India Times, Indian Express, and various other international news channels are broadcasting this news day in and day out. But you, my dear students, may be wondering, how is all this going to affect you when you are sitting at home watching this video while our Goan youth is creating awareness through art and dance? Of course, it is going to affect us not now, but someday if we don't speak against it. And for that, we first need to know how important our environment is for us, which brings us to learning about it in our new chapter, Our Environment.
By the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain what an ecosystem is, identify the role of the producers, consumers, and the decomposers in the food chain, and list a few of the environmental problems caused by our negligence. What is the effect of adding waste to the environment? Human activities produce a lot of waste materials which are thrown away into the environment. These wastes cause pollution of air, water, and soil. The waste materials produced are of two main types. Which are they? Yes, they are biodegradable waste and non-biodegradable waste. Let us learn each of them in detail. Biodegradable wastes are the wastes which are decomposed into harmless substances by microorganisms. That means they are broken down, like vegetables, fruits, pulses, cereals, cotton, jute, wool, wood, leather, paper, animal dung, animal bones, and so on. The non-biodegradable wastes are the wastes which are not decomposed by microorganisms like polythene bags, plastics, synthetic or man-made fibers, glass, metals, synthetic rubber, insecticides, pesticides, and so on. The environment comprises of the air you breathe, the water that covers the surface, the animals and the plants around you, and much more. The environment is made up of various ecosystems like gardens, lakes, forests, and so on. An ecosystem is a place where the living organisms and the non-living components of the environment interact with each other. All the organisms such as plants, animals, microorganisms, and human beings, as well as the physical surroundings, interact with each other and they maintain a balance. All these living organisms in an area interact with the non-living constituents of the environment, and such interaction is called an ecosystem. Therefore, an ecosystem consists of biotic and abiotic components, which comprise of living organisms. An abiotic contains physical factors like temperature, rainfall, wind, soil, and minerals. It looks wonderful from here, but are there any specific roles that the animals play in the ecosystem? Or do they all contribute equally to the ecosystem? Organisms in the ecosystem are grouped as producers, consumers, and decomposers based on the manner that which they sustain themselves. The producers are organisms that produce their own food without the help of any other organism. They make their food from inorganic substances. They are also known as autotrophs. All green plants and certain blue-green algae produce food by photosynthesis come under this category. The consumers are organisms that cannot produce their own food and depend on producers for their food. Consumers are known as heterotrophs and they depend on autotrophs for their food. These organisms consume the food either directly or indirectly by feeding on other consumers. The consumers can be classified as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and parasites. Decomposers, they help to decompose the dead remains of organisms, and in the process, complex or large molecules are broken down into simpler ones. If they decompose the dead remains, how do they help the ecosystem? The decomposed materials are used by the other organisms like plants for their sustenance. Therefore, decomposers are also known as organisms of decay or saprobes or saprophytes. They break down the dead remains of organisms which are used by other members of the ecosystem. Bacteria and fungi are examples of saprobes. Let us now revise what an ecosystem and its components are. An ecosystem consists of all the living organisms in an area along with the non-living components and their interaction. There are different types of ecosystems. They are natural ecosystems like forests, deserts, grasslands, mountains, ponds, lakes, rivers, etc. Artificial ecosystems are like gardens, parks, crop fields, aquariums, zoos, etc. In other words, artificial ecosystems are man-made ecosystems. Let us now revise what are the different components of an ecosystem. An ecosystem consists of two main components. Can you name them? Yes, of course. They are biotic and abiotic components. From the name itself, you can know what these components mean. Biotic components are the living components like plants, animals, and microorganisms. They consist of three main categories: producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers are the green plants which produce food by which process? Yes, you're right, by photosynthesis. Consumers are mostly herbivores which get their food directly from plants. They in turn are eaten by carnivores which get their food indirectly from plants. And then omnivores are the ones that get their food directly or indirectly from plants. The decomposers are microorganisms which decompose dead plants and animals. They decompose complex organic substances or large organic substances into simple inorganic substances. And these substances go into the soil which can be again used by the plants. The next category are the abiotic components, which are the non-living components like air, water, soil, minerals, sunlight, temperature, wind, etc. You have seen organisms that feed on one another to sustain themselves in the ecosystem. This forms a chain. The food chain describes the feeding relationships between organisms within an ecosystem. Let us take this chart as an example which depicts the different organisms that are connected in an ecosystem. The arrows are connecting the lower level organisms which are consumed by the higher level organisms. This shows the flow of energy of transfer. Each step or level of the food chain forms a trophic level. Trophic levels are categorized as per their feeding behavior. The autotrophs or producers or the plants are at the first trophic level. The herbivores or primary consumers like bees, insects come in the second level. Small carnivores like rats, snakes come under secondary consumers at the third level, and larger consumers like the eagle form the fourth trophic level. Did you know that a huge amount of energy is lost at each stage in the food chain? Let us now revise what a food chain is. A food chain is the flow of food energy from one organism to the next and to the next and so on. They usually start with a producer, mostly the plants, and end with a carnivore. In a food chain, an organism gets food from one group of organisms. In other words, a food chain is a process of eating and being eaten by somebody. Now, there are 3 examples of food chain that will be given to you. The first one, from grass to deer and to lion. So the grass is eaten by the deer and the lion eats the deer. The grass over here is the producer, the deer becomes the primary consumer and the lion the secondary consumer. This is a good example of a food chain with 3 steps. Let us look at a food chain with 4 steps. Grass is eaten by the insects, the frog eats the insects, and the snake in turn eats the frog. So there are 4 steps in this food chain. The grass is the producer, the insects are the primary consumers, the frog is the secondary consumer, and the snake is a tertiary consumer. The next one is of 5 steps. The grass is eaten by the moth is eaten by the frog is eaten by the snake, and at last, the hawk eats the snake. Let's revise what trophic levels are. Each step in a food chain where transfer of food energy takes place is called a trophic level. The first trophic level consists of producers like green plants and algae. The second trophic level consists of primary consumers like the deer, rabbit, sparrows, insects, etc. The third trophic level consists of secondary consumers like the snake, spider, fox, etc. The fourth trophic level consists of tertiary consumers like the wolf, the bear, hawk, and various others. Since the transfer of food energy decreases at every trophic level, the number of trophic levels are limited and do not exceed 4 or 5. That means you will not have not more than 4 or 5 levels in a food chain. Why do we eat? We eat to get energy. The food that we eat acts as a fuel and provides energy to do work. This energy is passed on from the producers to the tertiary consumers. Autotrophs capture the energy from the sunlight and convert it into chemical energy. This energy supports all the activities of the living world. From the autotrophs, the energy through the food chain goes to the heterotrophs. So, when one form of energy is changed to another, some energy is lost to the environment in the form of solid waste, movement energy, and heat energy, which cannot be used again. Therefore, only a small amount of energy is transferred to the next trophic level. So, what is the amount of energy that is transferred from one level to the other? The green plants in the terrestrial ecosystem capture about 1% of the energy from the sunlight that falls on the leaves and converts it into energy. When these green plants are eaten by primary consumers, a great deal of energy is lost by heat. Some of it goes into digestion, some in work, and some in growth and reproduction. An average of 10% of the food eaten is turned into its own body and made available to the next consumer. Therefore, only 10% can be taken as the average value that reaches the next level of consumer. Let us revise how the energy flow is in trophic levels. Green plants or producers absorb about 1% of the solar energy which falls on the leaves, and it is stored in as food energy during photosynthesis. During the transfer of food energy from one trophic level to the next, 90% of the energy is lost. That means how much is transferred? Yes, you are right. Only 10% is transferred to the next trophic level. So, there is a decrease in the amount of food energy which is transferred at every trophic level by 10%. This is known as the 10% law. Look at the loss of energy in this trophic level. You have the producers which have 10,000 kilocalories. Then they are eaten by the primary consumers. From 10,000 kilocalories, it becomes 10% less. You can calculate it and find out that it is 1,000 kilocalories for primary consumers. Now again, the primary consumers are eaten by secondary consumers, and you have only 100 kilocalories from there, which again you can calculate by 10%. Next, the next level is of the tertiary consumers, and you see that the tertiary consumers are having only 10 kilocalories which are transferred to them. Again, 10% of 100 will give you 10. This way you can calculate the loss of energy at any trophic level. So you can see from producers which had 10,000 kilocalories, the last person to eat it are the tertiary consumers, and they have 10 kilocalories only from the 10,000. This is called the 10% law. With only 10% of energy reaching the next level, isn't it difficult to manage the ecosystem? Well, it certainly limits the number of trophic levels in the food chain. There are generally a greater number of individuals at the lower level of the ecosystem. The length and the complexity of food chain varies or is different. This is like the plants and fruits eaten by goats, cows, rats and rabbits. And after that, rats being eaten by owls, snakes or cats. Yes, instead of a straight line food chain, the relationship can be shown as a series of branching lines, and this is called a food web. Did you know that unknowingly the food chemicals can enter the food body through food chain? One of the reasons is the use of several pesticides and other chemicals to protect the crops from diseases and pests. These chemicals are either washed into the soil or into the water. These are absorbed from the soil by the plants along with water and minerals, and therefore taken up by fish or the aquatic animals. This is one way by which it enters the food chain. Why is anything not done about it? These chemicals are not degradable and accumulate at each trophic level. As human beings occupy the topmost part of the food chain, the maximum amount of these chemicals are concentrated in the humans, and this is called biological magnification. Does this mean that my body is affected too? We are concerned about the chemicals and entering the body, but not worried about the environment. We have been polluting the air, causing deforestation, acid rains, and thereby not only endangering the earth and other living organisms, but ourselves. This is why food grains such as wheat and rice, vegetables and fruits, and even meat contain a lot of pesticide residues. These residues cannot be removed by washing or by other means. Burning of plastic can release a lot of toxic gases. Plastics stay in the earth's crust for a long time, but why are they not biodegradable? Can we digest stones? No, we cannot. Just like the enzymes in the stomach can act only on specific food, the bacteria and saprobes can degrade only organic substances, but not man-made substances like plastics. The ozone is a 3-atom molecule of oxygen. The ultraviolet radiations in the atmosphere split the oxygen into free oxygen atoms. These free atoms combine with atmospheric oxygen and form ozone. There is an ozone layer in the stratosphere which acts as a natural sunblock and shields us from the ultraviolet radiations of the sun. Do you know what could happen if this shield was weak and the UV rays penetrated through it? Yes, this could cause damage to organisms and cause skin cancers in human beings. In the 1980s, it was discovered that the amount of ozone in the atmosphere was dropping sharply. And this was because of synthetic chemicals like chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs, which are used in refrigerators and fire extinguishers. In 1987, the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, froze the CFC production and stopped it. We have been given many chances, but we never learn. Let us look at another hazard. Visit any town or city like Panjim and we are sure to find heaps of garbage or solid waste. The increased use of non-degradable items such as syringes, plastics, polythene bags has resulted in much of the waste becoming non-biodegradable.
Students, I hope you have enjoyed learning about the environment, and I wish you all the best in learning more and helping in conserving the nature. Thank you.